It was a typical day at the luxurious Grand Hotel. The kind of day where the warm sunshine streaming through the windows seemed to match the bright smiles of the guests. The lobby buzzed with activity, the air alive with the soft murmur of conversation, the occasional clinking of glasses, and the rustling of people shifting about, all mingling in an atmosphere of refined ease. The polished marble floors gleamed beneath the feet of well-dressed patrons who floated from the check-in desk to the bar, exchanging pleasantries along the way. Elegant chandeliers hung overhead, casting a warm glow that reflected off the pristine surfaces. Guests sat in plush velvet chairs, sipping their drinks, chatting with one another, or simply watching the world go by through the large glass windows that framed a picturesque view of the city beyond. Everything was calm, orderly, and predictable. The staff, in their perfectly pressed uniforms, moved with practiced efficiency, attending to the needs of the guests with gracious smiles and quiet professionalism. Every need was anticipated, every desire fulfilled. The Grand Hotel had long been the epitome of luxury and service, and it seemed as if nothing could disturb the serene order of the day. The hotel itself was a place of history, with towering columns, an elegant facade, and interiors adorned with intricate woodwork, velvet drapes, and golden accents. Guests came from far and wide, drawn by the promise of impeccable service, unrivaled luxury, and an atmosphere of opulence. For those who entered its hallowed halls, it was a sanctuary from the hustle and bustle of the outside world. Everything, from the scent of fresh flowers that greeted you at the door, to the soft, soothing piano music that played in the background, was designed to provide a sense of peace, elegance, and quiet indulgence. But just as the clock struck noon, signaling the height of the afternoon rush, the doors to the lobby swung open with startling force, drawing the attention of everyone in the room. The soft ambient hum of the hotel, the easy chatter of guests, and the smooth movements of the staff all paused at once as the heavy doors parted. And then, in walked a man who immediately commanded the spotlight. It wasn't because of his stature, though he was a tall man, or because of the usual air of confidence that many powerful people carried. No, this man commanded attention solely because of the outlandish, audacious accessory perched atop his head. It was a bright red hat, no ordinary hat, mind you, but one that seemed to belong more in a music video or a futuristic fashion show. The hat was enormous, towering like a beacon, with a series of flashing LED lights embedded within it. These lights created a kaleidoscope of colors that flickered and pulsed in an almost hypnotic rhythm, as if the hat itself were alive. The colors were ever-changing, moving from fiery reds to electric blues and shifting to vivid greens and purples. It was as if a disco ball had collided with a piece of avant-garde fashion, and this was the result. As if that weren't enough, the hat had a built-in sound system that emitted a low, steady electronic beat as the man strode into the room, completely unfazed by the stares of the people around him. The effect was immediate and jarring. Conversations halted, glasses paused mid-air, eyes widened. It was as if the man had just stepped out of a sci-fi movie, his garish headgear completely at odds with the calm, classic elegance of the Grand Hotel. The juxtaposition was so stark that for a moment the entire lobby seemed to hold its breath, unsure of how to react. Some guests stared, slack-jawed in disbelief. Others whispered in hushed tones, and a few, unable to contain their curiosity, began to chuckle. Among those who watched, the hotel manager, Mrs. Thompson, was the first to spring into action. She was a woman known for her unflappable demeanor, her ability to keep things running smoothly, and her unwavering commitment to maintaining the decorum of the establishment. Her expression hardened into one of disapproval as she quickly took in the sight of the man and his outrageous hat. It was a clear violation of the hotel's meticulously maintained atmosphere, and Mrs. Thompson was not one to let anything slip through the cracks when it came to enforcing the hotel's strict policies. Her heels clicked sharply against the marble floor, a sound that seemed to punctuate the tension in the air as she marched over to the man. She was not one to tolerate disruptions, and this was certainly one of the most noticeable disturbances she had encountered in years of managing the hotel. Her face was a picture of practiced politeness, but beneath it was the unmistakable glint of authority that told everyone she was in charge. "Excuse me, sir," she said, her voice calm but firm as she approached him. "I'm afraid you're going to have to remove that thing." She gestured toward the flashing hat with an air of exasperation, her lips pressed tightly together in a thin line of barely restrained frustration. The man, who was none other than Elon Musk, looked down at her with a mischievous smile, his eyes twinkling with amusement. He was enjoying this far more than he let on. He had always been a man who relished the spotlight, who thrived on making a scene and drawing attention. It seemed that this moment would be no different. "Oh, this old thing?" Musk said with a teasing grin, tapping the side of the hat. It emitted a soft electronic beep in response, and Musk looked at Mrs. Thompson with a mock-innocent expression. "It's just a little something I like to wear to make a statement. You know, spice things up a bit." He chuckled to himself, clearly relishing the chaos he was causing. Musk had made a career out of turning heads and upsetting expectations, and it seemed this day would be no different. Mrs. Thompson's face reddened with annoyance as she tried to maintain control of the situation. She was a woman who valued order and precision, who had built her reputation on ensuring that the hotel's decorum was never compromised. But now, with Musk standing before her, grinning like a schoolboy who had pulled off an elaborate prank, she was forced to wrestle with a growing sense of frustration. "I'm sorry, sir, but we have a strict dress code here at the Grand Hotel, and that," she gestured toward the flashing hat, "is not in keeping with our standards." Musk smirked, his eyes gleaming with mischief. "A dress code? How quaint! How boring," he said, his tone dripping with sarcasm as he flicked his hand dismissively. It was clear that he wasn't about to comply. "Come on, let's be real. This place needs a little more excitement, don't you think?" Mrs. Thompson's jaw tightened as she fought to keep her cool. She had dealt with difficult guests before, but this man was unlike any she had encountered in her years of managing the hotel. "I'm afraid you'll need to remove that hat, sir, or I will have to ask you to leave," she said, her voice firming in an effort to regain control of the situation. Musk wasn't backing down. Instead, he leaned in closer, lowering his voice to a theatrical whisper. "Oh, I don't think so," he said, his grin widening. "You see, I'm a paying guest here, and as a guest, I think I should be allowed to wear whatever I like, don't you?" He smiled a slow, knowing smile, enjoying the discomfort his boldness was causing. He loved this kind of standoff, the kind where he could take control of the situation simply by being outrageous and pushing boundaries. Mrs. Thompson's eyes widened in outrage. She was a woman who was accustomed to making decisions, to holding the reins of any situation. But this impromptu challenge to her authority was unexpected and infuriating. "If you refuse to comply, I will have no choice but to call security," she said, her voice trembling slightly as the weight of the words settled in. Musk's grin only widened as he leaned back slightly, surveying her with amusement. "You really don't know who you're talking to, do you?" he asked, his voice laced with humor, clearly enjoying the exchange. Mrs. Thompson, unfazed by his comment, crossed her arms and stared him down, her face resolute. "I don't care who you are, sir," she said, her voice gaining strength. "You're not welcome here with that thing on your head. If you don't remove it, I'll ask you to leave immediately." But just as Mrs. Thompson prepared to escalate the situation and call security, Musk dropped a bombshell that sent shockwaves through the room. He straightened up and smiled wickedly, letting the words hang in the air. "Actually," he said, with a dramatic pause, "I'm the new owner of this hotel." The effect was instantaneous. Mrs. Thompson froze, her face draining of color as the full impact of his words hit her. She stood there, her mouth opening and closing, but no words came out. The room seemed to spin around her as her professional composure cracked, and she struggled to comprehend what had just been said. She stumbled backward, her knees weakening as she realized the true identity of the man standing before her. I had no idea, she stammered, her voice a faint whisper of disbelief. Musk smiled sweetly, his earlier mischief giving way to a touch of mock sympathy. Of course you didn't, he said, his voice dripping with amusement. That's what makes this so much fun. The lobby, which had been buzzing with tension, now erupted into whispers. Guests. The lobby, which had been buzzing with tension, now erupted into whispers. Guests exchanged astonished glances, some barely able to believe what they had just heard. Musk, standing in the center of the room like a ringmaster, soaked in the reactions around him, his grin growing even wider. His eyes sparkled with amusement as the weight of his words sank in, sending ripples of disbelief through the crowd. It was as if the very foundation of the Grand Hotel had shifted, and no one quite knew how to handle the news. Was this some kind of joke? Had he truly just claimed ownership of the prestigious establishment? Mrs. Thompson, meanwhile, was caught in a disorienting daze. She was a woman who prided herself on being in control, on managing even the most difficult of situations with grace and authority. But now, faced with the reality that this eccentric man in a flashing garish hat was her new boss, she found herself at a loss for words. Her mind raced, desperately trying to recalibrate. Was this some kind of elaborate prank, or had the hotel's board of directors made a decision she wasn't aware of? She stood frozen, her arms still crossed, her gaze unwavering but disoriented. I had no idea, she repeated, her voice now strained almost a whisper. The realization that her authority in this space had just been undermined by a man she had assumed was a mere guest was too much to process in a single moment. Musk didn't seem in the least bit concerned by her confusion. If anything, he was enjoying the spectacle of it all. Of course you didn't, he said again, this time with a tinge of mock sympathy. I'm sure it'll all make sense soon enough. His tone was teasing, playful, but also laced with a deeper, almost predatory amusement. After all, it's my hotel now, he added with a finality that left no room for argument. The guests around them, still trying to digest what had just transpired, began murmuring amongst themselves. Some expressed shock, others intrigue, and a few, who had been in the hotel enough to know Mrs. Thompson's reputation, felt a twinge of sympathy for her. They couldn't help but wonder what this unexpected change in ownership would mean for the future of the Grand Hotel. Would it remain the same, or would Musk's unorthodox sense of style shake the very foundations of its tradition?